It was a quiet evening, the kind where silence feels almost heavy. I had just come home from work, drained from another long day that had stretched me beyond my limits. My back ached, my head pounded, and I wanted nothing more than to disappear into the comfort of my bed. My brother, Daniel, was in the living room, scrolling absently through his phone. He looked up as I entered, concern softening his usually calm face. "You look exhausted," he said simply. I nodded. "Work's been killing me this week." He put his phone aside and motioned for me to sit. "You've been so tense lately. Let me help." At first, I hesitated. He'd always been the protective, caring one since we were kids. After our parents divorced, we became each other's home. He cooked for me, checked in on me, and sometimes, just sat quietly when I didn't have words. His presence was comfort, not tension. When he offered to massage my back, it felt innocent, just another gesture of care from someone who had always looked after me. I sat on the couch, facing away from him, the room dimly lit by the golden hue of a single lamp. His hands were warm against my shoulders. I sighed as the tension began to melt away. The quiet hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence. No words were exchanged, but the comfort in that silence felt familiar, safe. He worked gently, carefully pressing the spots he knew were always sore. "You've been working too hard," he murmured. "I have to," I said softly. "I can't afford to slow down." He chuckled under his breath. "You never can." The rhythm of his hands, the warmth of his touch, it all felt too soothing. My breathing slowed, and for a moment, I felt at peace. But then something subtle began to shift. It wasn't his actions, not really. It was the silence. The air thickened with something unnamed. My chest tightened, and I suddenly became aware of how close we were. I brushed the thought aside, convincing myself I was overthinking. He was just being kind. But the warmth spreading through me wasn't just relief anymore, it was confusion. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on the sound of rain beginning to fall outside. But inside, something had changed, and I didn't yet understand what it was. That evening ended like any other. When he finished, I thanked him and smiled. But when I went to bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something invisible had shifted between us, something I couldn't name but could already feel pressing quietly against the edges of my mind. The next day, everything seemed normal. We talked, shared breakfast, even laughed. But the comfort felt different, tainted somehow by an emotion I couldn't understand. Every glance held too much weight, every silence too much thought. That night, the scene replayed in my head over and over again. His hands on my back. The silence. The comfort. The confusion. I tried to tell myself it was all innocent. But deep inside, I felt that something about that moment had gone beyond brotherly care. Not physically, but emotionally. A memory came back to me, clear as sunlight. When I was in school and broke my ankle, Daniel had stayed by my bedside every night until I fell asleep. He'd always been that kind of brother, steady, dependable, strong. I had loved that about him. But maybe I had relied on it too much. Maybe I had begun to confuse comfort with connection. The realization scared me. I wasn't sure where the line was anymore. Later that week, I found myself watching him differently. Not with desire, but with a strange kind of awareness. I noticed the way he carried himself, the calmness in his voice, the quiet strength that had always made me feel safe. And I hated myself for feeling so aware. That evening, as we sat together watching TV, he turned to me and said softly, "You've been distant lately. Did I do something wrong?" His question froze me. I wanted to say no, but my throat tightened. "No," I whispered. "I've just been tired." But he didn't believe me. His eyes lingered on mine a little longer than they should have. And in that single glance, something passed between us again, an unspoken emotion that neither of us wanted to name. The warmth I used to feel around him now made me uneasy. I missed the simplicity we once had, the easy laughter, the freedom of trust. Now everything felt fragile, as if one wrong word could break what we'd built all our lives. That night, I lay awake, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. I wasn't crying because something bad had happened. I was crying because something pure had been touched by confusion, and I didn't know how to fix it. Days passed, but the heaviness stayed. We still spoke, still acted normal, but underneath, silence held our guilt like a shadow. He'd come home from work, ask about my day, and I'd answer without looking up. I couldn't meet his eyes anymore. Each small interaction reminded me of that moment, of how comfort had turned into something unsteady. One morning, while washing dishes, I caught my reflection in the window and realized how much I had changed. There was a sadness in my eyes that hadn't been there before, a quiet, gnawing guilt that wouldn't let me breathe. I started journaling again. Page after page, I wrote about confusion, fear, and guilt. I didn't blame him, and I didn't fully blame myself either. But I couldn't escape the truth. I had emotionally crossed a line I couldn't unsee. Sometimes, I'd hear him walking past my room late at night. He'd stop, hesitate, then move on. That hesitation said everything. He felt it too. We had both lost something sacred. He began keeping his distance. Subtle, but noticeable. No more late-night talks. No more inside jokes. He stayed busy, avoided sitting too close. It hurt, but it also felt necessary. Still, the guilt was unbearable. I felt like I had betrayed something invisible, a moral promise to myself. Not love, not romance, but something deeper. Emotional loyalty. I started questioning everything. How fragile are boundaries between family and affection? How easily can loneliness disguise itself as closeness? One evening, I opened my journal and wrote. He didn't do anything wrong, and neither did I. But we let our hearts wander where they shouldn't have gone. And that, in itself, is its own kind of betrayal. The next morning, I left the journal open on my desk by accident. When I returned, it was closed. Quietly, gently. We never spoke about it. But from that day forward, I knew he had read it, and understood. A week later, he asked if we could talk. His voice was steady, but there was something fragile underneath it. We sat at the kitchen table, the morning sun filtering through the window blinds. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "I think we both felt something that we shouldn't have. I don't know how it happened, but I'm sorry." His words broke the silence that had been suffocating us. I swallowed hard and nodded. I know. I've been blaming myself for feeling confused, but it wasn't intentional. It just happened. He looked down. Sometimes, people reach out for warmth when they're hurting. It doesn't mean it was wrong. It just means we're human. That moment brought both pain and relief. We weren't angry, just sad that something so small, so innocent, had shaken the foundation of our closeness. We agreed to give each other space. He spent more time outside the house, and I started focusing on work again. Slowly, the weight began to lift. Weeks passed. I started therapy and learned about emotional boundaries, how easily they blur when loneliness and love mix. I realized that emotional infidelity isn't always about romance. Sometimes, it's about seeking comfort in the wrong place, even when no harm was intended. Daniel and I began rebuilding our relationship, quietly, from a distance. We talked less but with more honesty. We learned to redefine care, not through closeness, but through respect and space. One night, months later, I stood by my window, watching the same kind of rain that had fallen that night. For the first time, I didn't feel confusion. I felt peace. I whispered softly to myself. It wasn't love. It wasn't sin. It was a moment that taught me where my heart's limits truly are. I turned off the light and walked away from the window, carrying that lesson with me, knowing that healing sometimes means forgiving yourself for feelings you never asked to feel.